There are moments in life that change you. Not gradually, the way most things do, not slowly, the way the seasons shift or the years quietly pile up behind you. I mean moments that change you in an instant. Moments where everything you thought you understood about safety, about the world, about how people behave, all of it shatters in the span of a single heartbeat. You're just going about your normal life, doing something completely ordinary, camping by a lake, walking home from school, sitting behind a hotel front desk on a rainy night, and then, without any warning at all, the world reveals its darker side to you. And once you've seen it, you can never fully unsee it. That's what tonight's stories are about. Real people. Real moments. The kind of experiences that don't fade with time no matter how much the person wishes they would. A man alone in the wilderness who realizes, far too late, that the strangers approaching his campfire are not there for friendly conversation. A young boy in the back of a stranger's car, only 7 years old, who suddenly understands that something has gone terribly wrong, and that the woman driving is not who she claimed to be. A late-night hotel worker who sees something through the glass lobby window that sends every instinct she has screaming. A college student who peers through a peephole and sees something standing in the hallway that belongs in a horror film, not in real life. A person waiting for a train who sees a figure standing on the tracks, a figure that somehow survives the train's arrival, and then turns to look directly at them. These are the kinds of stories that stay with you. The kind that make you pause before you step outside at night, that make you glance a little longer at a stranger's face, that make you trust that quiet, insistent feeling in your stomach when something just doesn't feel right, because sometimes that feeling is the only thing standing between you and a situation you cannot come back from. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad you found your way to this channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you never miss a new story. We're building something really special here together, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. Now, settle in somewhere comfortable. Let's begin. Story 1, The Campsite. I've always loved the quiet that comes with being out in the backcountry. Not the kind of quiet you get at home with the television turned low and the neighborhood humming along in the background, but real quiet. Deep quiet. The kind where the only sounds are the wind moving through the trees and the soft lapping of water against a lakeshore. That kind of quiet is hard to find, and when you do find it, you want to hold on to it for as long as you can. I'm not much of an experienced hiker, and I never have been. I've always kept my outings simple and manageable, trails no longer than a mile or 2 at the most. The particular trail I was using on this trip was just over a mile long, running from my campsite by the lake all the way back to the trailhead where I'd left my truck parked. It was a familiar stretch, easy enough to walk without much effort, and it connected me to everything I needed. I'd been out there for the better part of the weekend, camping alongside the lake, enjoying the solitude and the open air. I had 2 more nights planned before I was due to head home. On the 3rd morning of my trip, I hiked back along that trail to my truck, grabbed my fishing rod, picked up a few extra supplies and some additional food, and then made the walk back to camp. I figured it was the perfect opportunity to do a little fishing while I had the time and peace to enjoy it properly. But when I got back to my campsite that afternoon, I noticed something had changed. There was a second tent set up now, positioned farther down the lakeshore along the edge of the water. I stood there for a moment, just looking at it. It was clearly inhabited, it was staked down properly, the way someone does when they're planning to stay, but there wasn't a single person visible anywhere near it. I thought about it for a moment. The only trail I knew of leading up to this part of the lake was the one I'd been using myself, and I hadn't passed a single soul on my walk back that morning. But I told myself there was likely some other path or access point I simply wasn't aware of. The woods are full of unofficial routes that don't appear on any map. I decided not to let it bother me, and I got my fishing rod set up and settled in for a few hours on the water. As the afternoon wore on, I kept glancing over at that tent. It became something of an unconscious habit. Every 20 minutes or so, my eyes would drift down the lakeshore in that direction. Over the entire 3 hours I sat there fishing, not once did I see a single person come or go from that tent. No movement, no shadow, no sound from that end of the lake. Nothing at all. When the sun began lowering toward the treeline, I packed up my rod and headed back to my tent. I made myself something to eat, gathered up a good collection of dry sticks, and waited as the last of the daylight bled out of the sky. When it was dark enough, I got my campfire going. And that was the exact moment when things stopped feeling normal. The second the fire caught and the light spread out around my campsite, I saw it, a shadow moving through the trees just ahead of me. Whoever it was, they were standing right at the edge where the firelight couldn't quite reach them, just beyond the ring of warmth and visibility the flames gave off. I stared into the darkness for several seconds, but I couldn't see anything more. Just that one brief movement, and then nothing. My first thought was that it had to be the person from the other tent. They were out gathering sticks for their own fire, most likely. The timing seemed almost too precise. The moment I lit mine, they appeared at the edge of my camp, but I told myself I was reading too much into it. I leaned back in my camping chair, let out a long breath, and turned my attention to the fire, the stars beginning to emerge overhead, and the glassy surface of the lake. It was genuinely beautiful out there. So peaceful that I could feel my body start to relax against my will, my eyelids growing heavy, my mind drifting. And then, about 30 minutes later, I looked up past the flames. There were figures coming out of the forest. I counted them as they came closer, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 men, all of them walking with purpose directly toward my campsite. A rush of thoughts went through my head all at once, but I pressed down hard on the panic rising in my chest and told myself to stay calm. Maybe they were a camping group from somewhere nearby. Maybe they needed help with something, directions, or a medical issue, or a lighter for their own fire. I told myself there were perfectly reasonable explanations for this. I told myself to stay calm. When they walked into the light of my fire, I could see them clearly. They were all somewhere in their 30s or 40s. Their faces were completely blank, no smiles, no nods of acknowledgement, no friendly wave or greeting. Just expressionless, flat stares, and they were still walking straight toward me. When they were only a few feet away and still not stopping, I stood up from my chair. I tried to keep my voice steady. I asked them what they needed. Not one of them said a single word. 2 of the men immediately split off and went around behind me, heading straight for my tent. The other 2 stepped up and shoved me out of the way. There was no ambiguity left in what was happening. I understood it completely. But I also understood with absolute clarity that fighting back against 4 men in the middle of the wilderness, miles from any other person, was not a risk I could afford to take. So I didn't fight. I watched as 2 of them began ransacking my tent and going through all of my belongings, while the other 2 kept pushing me, not aggressively, not violently, but insistently, steadily, further and further away from the fire and further away from my campsite. I kept talking. I tried everything I could think of, asking what they wanted, telling them they could take whatever they needed, anything to get some kind of response or reaction. But the 2 men pushing me away from my camp had an emptiness in their eyes that was far more frightening than anger would have been. There was nothing there. No emotion, no hesitation, no acknowledgement that I was even speaking. They just kept moving me further into the darkness, away from the firelight, away from the safety of open space. The trees closed in around us. The firelight faded behind me until it was just a faint orange glow between the trunks, and then even that disappeared. We were in total darkness. The only sound was the soft crush of leaves and dry grass under our feet. Then we stopped. I turned around and faced the 2 men. And standing there in the dark, surrounded by trees, completely cut off from any light or any escape route, every single fear I had been suppressing hit me all at once like a wall of cold water. One of them reached toward something. I ran. I didn't think. My body made the decision before my mind could catch up. I ran as hard and as fast as I possibly could, crashing through the underbrush, my feet pounding against the ground. I held on to my sense of direction with everything I had and aimed myself toward the trail. When I hit it, I didn't slow down. I ran that entire mile in the dark, not stopping once, until my hand slammed against the door of my truck. I got in, locked every door, started the engine, and drove. As far as I could tell, not one of them came after me. I filed a police report. But by the time anyone could respond, the men were long gone. Almost everything I had at that campsite had been taken. No trace of them was ever found, and no one was ever identified. What they were pulling me out into that forest to do, well, I think most of you already know the answer to that. And I think about it every single time I'm out in the wilderness alone. I got lucky. I know that. I got out with my life, and that's more than I might have deserved given how slowly I read the warning signs. If you've ever had a moment in the outdoors where something felt off, that quiet, insistent feeling that something wasn't right, trust it. Always trust it. Leave early if you have to. Your belongings can be replaced. You cannot. Story 2, The River Voice. If you grow up in a rural area, you grow up understanding that nature has rules. You learn them young, not from books, but from experience and from the warnings of the people around you who know the land. You learn which roads flood, which fields to stay out of after heavy rain, and which stretches of water are more dangerous than they look on a calm day. I grew up with a river. For some context, my school sat right in the middle of the countryside, genuinely in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields and forest. Just a little way behind the school building, running along the back of the property and continuing on past our family home, there was a river. On most days, it was manageable, no more than about a meter deep and roughly 3 meters wide. Perfectly calm. Almost pretty, in its way. Nothing that looked particularly threatening if you didn't know better. But we knew better. Everybody who lived near that river knew better. Because when the heavy rains came, and they did come, sometimes suddenly and without much warning, that river changed completely. There was another river of similar size upstream, and the two of them merged at a point just above our area. When rainfall was heavy enough, everything came sweeping down together. That gentle little river behind our home could become 4 meters deep and 6 meters wide in what felt like almost no time at all. There was a dam downstream that would hold the water back, but that just meant the flooding came instead, spreading outward across the low ground, creeping toward homes, changing the landscape overnight. Growing up near that river, we were warned about it constantly. The adults in my life never let us forget what it was capable of. And looking back now, I understand why. This particular night began with heavy rain. Not just ordinary rain, the kind of relentless, pounding downpour that fills gutters and turns dirt paths into rivers in their own right. Not long after the rain started, the wind picked up. A typhoon was moving in. School had already been cancelled for that day and the following one. I lay in bed listening to the rain hammer against the windows and the roof, unable to settle into proper sleep. I woke up several times throughout the night. Each time I did, I lay there in the dark with a tight, anxious feeling in my chest, thinking about the friends I had whose homes might be taking on water, thinking about elderly relatives who lived nearby. The kind of worry that comes from being part of a small, close community where you know everyone and you know exactly which houses sit on the lower ground. By around 4 in the morning, the heavy rain had finally started to ease. It dropped down to a light mist, almost gentle by comparison. And for some reason, a reason I've never been fully able to explain, I felt a pull to go outside and check the river. I know how that sounds. A teenage boy deciding, at 4 in the morning in the aftermath of a typhoon, that it would be a good idea to go out and check the water level. But at the time it felt like the right and responsible thing to do. I thought if I could tell my father and grandfather something useful about how high the water had risen, that would be meaningful. I wanted to feel capable and reliable. So I pulled on my boots and my coat, grabbed a flashlight, and slipped out into the night. The air outside was wet and cold. Everything smelled of mud and rain. I picked my way carefully across the saturated ground, moving in the direction of the river. Even with the rain reduced to a fine mist, the ground was treacherous, soft and slick underfoot, the kind of surface where a single wrong step could send you down. As I got closer to the river, I heard something. It wasn't the sound of the water, though the water was loud enough, churned up and fast-moving and full of everything the rain had swept into it. This was something different. A strange gurgling sound, rising and falling in a rhythm that didn't match the flow of the river. My first thought was that it was something mechanical, some kind of drainage system activating, or equipment from the dam downstream. But the closer I got, the less mechanical it sounded. It was something else entirely, and I couldn't quite identify what. I'll be honest with you, I was scared. Standing out there alone in the mud, in the dark, with nothing but a flashlight and that strange sound filling the air around me, I was genuinely frightened. But I kept moving forward until I was close enough to the riverbank to see the water level without putting myself in danger. I stood there for a moment, watching the dark water rush past. There's something almost hypnotic about a fast-moving river at night, the constant motion of it, the sound, and despite everything, I felt myself calming slightly. Then I turned to go home. And I heard a voice. I spun around so fast I nearly slipped in the mud. I swung my flashlight toward where the sound had come from, out over the river and the surrounding trees. All I could see was the dark, muddy water and the bare winter trees along the bank. Nothing else. I told myself it was nothing. I was overtired, stressed from the storm, hearing things that weren't there. I turned to leave again. And then I heard it again, clear and sharp, like a bell cutting through the sound of the river. Hey! Just that one word. But unmistakably a human voice. I spun around again and swept my flashlight across the water, the bank, the trees. Was someone hurt? Had someone been caught out in the storm and was calling for help? I searched every shadow I could find with that flashlight beam, but I saw nothing. No person. No movement. I told myself there was no possible way anyone would be out there in those conditions. No reasonable person, no safe person, would be standing by that river in the middle of the night after a typhoon. I talked myself into believing I had imagined it, and I turned and walked as quickly as I safely could back toward home. I didn't run, the ground was too unstable for that, but I moved with everything I had. Before I reached the house, I heard the voice one final time. It was the loudest it had been. The clearest. Not a whisper or a murmur, but someone calling out with full force. Hey, you. I didn't stop. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and lay in my bed until sunrise, my heart beating too fast, my mind turning the whole thing over and over without any answer. In the days that followed, a body was recovered from the river downstream. When I heard that, something inside me went cold and stayed cold. Because what if the voice I heard wasn't my imagination? What if someone had actually been in that river, swept along by the floodwater, calling out to whoever might be close enough to hear? What if I was the closest person, and I walked away? I tell myself I was just a kid. I tell myself there was very little I could have done even if I had understood what was happening. But on rainy nights, when I hear the sound of water running hard and fast, I still go back to that riverbank in my mind. And I still wonder whether I could have done something. Whether I should have done something. Whether the choice I made to walk away, even in fear, even in confusion, cost someone their life. That is a weight that doesn't lift easily. And I carry it still. Story 3, The Hotel Lobby. Working the overnight shift at a hotel front desk sounds like a quiet job. And most of the time, it is. You're there for the guests who need late checkouts, the occasional room service request, the phone calls that come in at odd hours. Most nights, it's just you and the coffee machine and the soft hum of the building around you. I'd been working overnights at a well-known hotel chain here in the US for close to a year by the time this happened. The shift ran from 11 at night to 7 in the morning. I'd gotten used to the rhythm of it, the strange half-awake feeling you carry through those dark hours, the way time moves differently when the rest of the world is asleep. But I never fully stopped fighting the tiredness, and on nights when it was raining, something about the sound of it against the windows made staying awake even harder. This particular night was a pouring, steady rain. There were no bookings scheduled to arrive, and I wasn't anticipating any walk-ins given the weather. My only companions were a warm cup of coffee and the quiet glow of the lobby around me. At about 1 in the morning, the phone rang. I answered it, and before I could even get through my greeting, a man's voice came rushing through the line. It was muffled and hard to hear clearly. There was a loud background noise coming through, the kind of noise that makes it difficult to make out individual words. He was asking, very quickly, whether we were still taking walk-in guests. I told him yes, we had rooms available. He said something back, but I couldn't make it out through the interference. I was about to ask him to repeat himself when something made me look up from the desk. Through the front window of the hotel lobby, in the darkness and the pouring rain, there was a small light glowing. It was a phone screen. Someone was standing directly against the window with their phone raised to their ear. He was already there. He hadn't called from somewhere else, he was right outside, standing in the rain, pressed up against the glass. I looked at that silhouette for just a moment, and something in me pulled tight. A feeling I couldn't quite name, not fear exactly, not yet, but an instinct that said something about this was not right. I made a deliberate decision not to let on that I'd seen him. I kept my voice even and professional, and a moment later the call ended. The phone screen went dark outside. The shadow moved toward the entrance. The doors opened, and a man walked into the lobby. He was completely soaked through, water dripping from his hair, his clothes heavy and dark with rain. He came directly to the front desk and asked for a room. Just like that, flat and blunt, no greeting. His face was exhausted, not just tired, but the kind of hollow, deep exhaustion that looks like a person who hasn't slept in days. I found him a room in the system and asked how he'd like to pay. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a debit card, and handed it to me. I ran it through. It was declined. When I looked up to let him know, he was staring at me. Not just looking, staring. Fixed, unblinking, completely still except for a few rapid, odd blinks. I told him the card hadn't gone through and asked if he had another one he'd like to try. He didn't answer. He didn't move. The second stretched out between us, and the unease I'd been pushing down started spreading through my whole body. I set the card back down on the desk and slid it toward him. He didn't look at it. He turned away from the counter and started walking, not toward the exit, but down the hallway leading to the guest rooms. That was the moment I stopped second-guessing myself. I pressed the button behind the desk that sends an immediate alert to law enforcement, and then I went into the hallway after him. He had stopped in front of one of the guest room doors. And then he began pounding on it. His fists hit that door hard, and his voice when he yelled, demanding whoever was inside to open up, was harsh and ragged and frightening in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. I told him to stop. I kept my distance, unsure of what state he was in, not wanting to escalate anything unnecessarily. And then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. He was trying to use it to pry the door open, dragging it along the frame, jamming it into the gap. I yelled at him that the police were already on their way. He stopped for just a second. He turned and looked at me, and the expression on his face, I will not forget it. He screamed at me to open the door for him. And then he started coming down the hallway toward me. I ran. Straight out of the hotel, into the parking lot, into the rain. Through the lobby window, I could see him go back to that door and keep pounding. The police arrived quickly. They got inside before he was able to break through, and they managed to get the knife away from him without anyone being hurt. He was placed in a patrol car. The woman inside the room, a young woman, visibly shaking, clearly terrified, came out once it was safe. Here is the part that stays with me. The man was her ex-boyfriend. She hadn't seen him or spoken to him in over 10 years. And yet somehow, he had known exactly which hotel she was staying at, and exactly which room she was in. How he obtained that information, nobody could determine. How long he had been watching her before that night, tracking her movements, knowing her location, nobody knows that either. And what he intended to do if he had gotten through that door is something I think about and hope I never have to know. If you've ever worried about someone from your past finding you, please, take your instincts seriously. Talk to someone. Document what you can. And know that there are people out there who will help you. If something in these stories is hitting close to home for you tonight, please reach out to someone you trust. And if you'd like to keep hearing stories like these, a like on this video truly helps more than you might think. It helps this community grow and keeps these stories reaching the people who need to hear them. Story 4, Dylan's Story. This next story is not mine. It belongs to my older cousin, Dylan, who recently told me what happened to him when he was just a little boy. He gave me permission to share it, and I'm going to tell it the way he told it to me, from his own point of view, in his own words as best I can relay them. I'm 24 years old now. I've had a full life, plenty of memories good and bad, the ordinary collection of experiences that come with growing up. But there is one memory from my childhood that I have never been able to shake. It doesn't fade. It doesn't soften. It stays exactly as vivid as the day it happened. I was 7 years old and in second grade. My school had what was called an extended day program, essentially an after-school arrangement, like a supervised daycare, for children whose parents worked late and couldn't be there for pickup right when the school day ended. For our family, that meant Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. On those days, my parents would come get me when they finished work. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, my older sister Alyssa would pick me up after her shift at McDonald's, usually around 4:30, an hour and a half after school ended. It was a chilly March afternoon, a Thursday, and we were all out on the playground the way we usually were during the after-school program. It was around 4:10 when Mr. McCann, the teacher supervising us outside, came over and told me it was time to go home. He walked me back into the building, where I collected my backpack and my things, and then walked me out to the lobby. There was a woman waiting there. She looked young, no older than 30, I'd guess. She was slim and not very tall, with very long dark hair and tan skin and a sharp, pointed nose. She had a lot of makeup on, a nose ring, and a tattoo visible on her left arm. She crouched down to my level and asked me if my name was Dylan. I said yes. She smiled and introduced herself as Heather. She told me she worked with my sister and had come to pick me up because my sister had to stay at work extra late that day. She never mentioned my sister's name. Not once. I didn't notice that at the time. I was 7 years old. I believed her completely. She took my hand and we walked out to her car together, and I didn't feel a single thing that told me to be afraid. She offered me some M&Ms when we got to the car, and I thought she was just being kind. I ate them. As it turned out, they were perfectly ordinary candy. But I didn't know that yet. For the first few minutes, nothing felt wrong at all. She drove out of the school parking lot and took the right road, the same route my parents and sister always took when they drove me home. I sat in the back seat, looking out the window, completely at ease. And then she drove right past my street. I watched it go by through the window. I told her she had missed the turn. She said, "Okay, just that one word," and kept driving down the main road. That was the moment her voice changed. The warm, friendly tone she had used when she introduced herself was completely gone. Her voice was flat and cold, like a door slamming shut. She wasn't concerned about how I was feeling. She wasn't concerned about me at all. I asked her if we could stop and get a Happy Meal. She told me to shut up. I sat in silence for a couple of minutes, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then I tried one more question. "So, are you and Alyssa friends or something?" She paused, and then she said, "Who's Alyssa?" 3 words. And my entire world collapsed. Even at 7 years old, even as small and inexperienced as I was, I understood what those 3 words meant. She didn't know my sister's name. She had never known it. Everything she had told me was a lie. I was in a car with a stranger who had taken me on purpose, and I had no idea where she was taking me. I started crying. I couldn't stop. Heather screamed at me to stop crying, to be quiet, to shut up. She was furious, short-tempered and frightening in a way that made me cry even harder. Eventually she got so fed up that she pulled over to the side of the road, shifted the car into park, and reached into the center console. She pulled out a roll of duct tape. And at that exact moment, a police car pulled up behind us. I don't know why it was there. I don't know if someone had reported the car or if it was coincidence or something else entirely. But the moment Heather saw those lights in the rearview mirror, she dropped the tape, slammed the car into drive, and floored the accelerator. The speed limit on that road was 30 miles per hour. She was doing at least 70. I held on and cried as she flew down those roads, taking turns at dangerous speeds, the whole car shaking with the force of it. And then, around a curve in the road, there were two more police cars, parked side by side, blocking the road completely. She hit the brakes hard. The car slid to a stop just before reaching them. She got out and ran. But the officers were ready for her, and they stopped her before she could reach the tree line along the road. She was taken into custody immediately. One of the officers came to the car, got me out, and drove me home. My sister Alyssa was standing in the doorway when the officer's car pulled up. She was sobbing. When she saw me get out, she ran to me and held me for what felt like forever, 2 full minutes of just holding on. My parents arrived not long afterward, having already heard what had happened. They were pale and shaken and barely able to speak. That night, they sat with me for a very long time and talked to me carefully and seriously about the importance of stranger danger, about how no matter what a person says, no matter how friendly or convincing they seem, you never go anywhere with someone you don't know without checking with a trusted adult first. The police came back later that evening to follow up. They asked me questions and filled in the picture a little more. Her name wasn't Heather. That wasn't her real name at all. She had no connection to my sister, not any connection. She was linked to a man who had been charged with serious crimes against children. What she intended to do with me, had she not been stopped, I was too young to fully understand at the time. I understand it now. What I have never been able to figure out is how she knew who I was. I was 7 years old. This was before social media existed in any meaningful way. I was a young child in a small school, and somehow this woman knew my name and which child to ask for. The only explanation that has ever made any sense to me involves Mr. McCann, the teacher who ran the after-school program and walked me out to that lobby. He was fired shortly after this incident. Years later, I saw his name in the news. He had been charged with molesting a student at another school. He took his own life before the case went to trial. I can't prove he sold my information to that woman. I will never know for certain. But I believe it. I believe it in my bones. To every child who might be listening to this, and to every parent, please. Talk about stranger danger. Talk about it more than once. Be specific, be clear, be honest about the fact that people who want to harm children are often very good at seeming safe and friendly and trustworthy. The warning signs are not always obvious. Sometimes there are no warning signs at all until it is almost too late. I was lucky. I got to go home. Story 5, Something on the Mountain Road. I'll be upfront with you, this one doesn't have a tidy answer. There's no resolution, no explanation, no satisfying conclusion. It's just a strange and unsettling thing that happened, and when I put it together with what happened to my friend afterward, it's never sat right with me. This happened when I was driving back home through the mountains after coming from Shea Prefecture. If you've never driven through mountain roads like these, let me try to give you a sense of what it's like. Long, winding stretches of road cutting through dense forest, rising and dipping with the landscape, very little in the way of lighting or other traffic. On a clear day, it's actually quite beautiful. At night, it's something else entirely. The darkness in the mountains is a different kind of dark, thicker, more complete, the kind that presses right up against your headlights and doesn't give much back. It was late at night, and I'll admit I was driving faster than I normally would have. I was well behind schedule, tired, and just wanted to get home. I was making good time along those mountain roads when I felt it, a jolt, a distinct impact beneath the car. The unmistakable sensation of running over something. Whatever it was, based on how the impact felt, it wasn't large. Basketball-sized, maybe. My immediate worry was that I had hit some kind of animal, and out in the mountains, there are plenty of wild things that could be that size. I braked hard and pulled over to the side of the road. I got out and looked back down the road behind me. Nothing. No shape in the darkness, no animal lying in the road. That gave me a small measure of relief, but I still knew what I had felt, and I couldn't just drive away without checking more thoroughly. I got down on my hands and knees alongside the car and looked underneath it. I pulled out my phone and used the torch to light up the underside of the vehicle, searching carefully for any sign of damage, a dent, a scrape, any indication that I had struck something. There was nothing. The car was completely unmarked. I checked again. And then a third time. I walked the road in both directions as far as the light from my phone would reach. I checked the surrounding shoulder, the edge of the trees. Nothing. Whatever I had felt, and I had definitely felt something, had left no evidence behind it all. Eventually, I had no choice but to accept that I wasn't going to find anything, and I got back in my car and drove home. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. It stayed with me in that low-level, nagging way that unanswered questions do. Weeks later, my friend called me one evening. We talked regularly, the way old friends do, and that night he told me something that made my skin go cold. He had been driving through the same mountain passes. And it had happened to him too, the exact same thing. A sudden jolt, the feeling of running over something. He pulled over, got out, searched thoroughly. Nothing. No damage to the car. No evidence of anything at all. He said the moment it happened, he thought of me and the story I'd told him. Two people. Same stretch of mountain road. Same experience, with nothing to show for it. I've thought about it a lot since then, and the explanation that troubles me most is also the one I keep coming back to. I think someone may have set something up out there, something attached to a line or a cord, something designed to create exactly that kind of impact, for the purpose of getting drivers to pull over and get out of their vehicles. A carjacking attempt, maybe. That was my first thought. But my friend has a very nice car, he's invested a lot of money into it, and neither of us was robbed or approached. So I kept turning it over. And the thought that settled on me and refused to leave was this: what if this setup wasn't meant for us? What if it was specifically designed to target a different kind of person, a woman, traveling alone on a dark mountain road, who would pull over, get out, and find herself alone in the dark with whoever had set the trap? I reported it. The response I got wasn't particularly encouraging, and nothing came of it as far as I know. But I think about those mountain roads after dark, and I think about that trap, and I think about who it might have been intended for. And it unsettles me deeply. If you ever drive those kinds of isolated roads at night and you feel something under your car, please don't stop in an isolated area. Drive to the nearest lit and populated place before you pull over to check. Your car can be repaired. Please just keep driving. Story 6, The Man in the Hallway. I've seen a lot of strange things in my life, but nothing that stopped me cold the way this one did. And I want to be clear, I'm not someone who frightens easily. You get used to a certain baseline level of chaos when you're renting an apartment in a rough part of town during your college years. This happened back in 2012. A few friends and I had decided to rent a one-bedroom apartment together near campus. We were young, we wanted our own space, and we wanted to be somewhere our parents and the school administration weren't looking over our shoulders. What we got was an apartment complex in one of the less desirable parts of the city, the kind of place where the police showed up at least once a week, where you fell asleep to the sound of arguments through thin walls, where you learned very quickly not to leave anything valuable in your car overnight. It was what it was. We accepted it as part of the deal. One night, my roommates were all out at a party, and I had stayed behind to study for an upcoming exam. The building was relatively quiet that evening. I could hear music playing somewhere up on one of the higher floors, but the hallway outside our apartment was still. It was around 11 at night. And then I heard something from out in the hallway. It was a heavy, scraping sound, like a large metal object being dragged slowly across the concrete floor. Alongside it was a lower, muffled sound, like someone speaking, words I couldn't quite make out, just the rhythm of a voice without the meaning. It went on for several minutes. I listened, growing more and more uneasy, until there was a loud crashing sound from somewhere in the corridor. I got up and went to the peephole. At first, I didn't see anything directly in front of my door. I waited. And then a figure came into view. He was a white man, and he stopped right in the space between my door and the door directly across the hallway from it. He stood there, and I stared at him through the peephole, and in the span of about 3 seconds, my brain registered 3 things simultaneously. First, he was not wearing a shirt, and he was sweating heavily, the kind of sweat that soaks a person through completely. Second, in his right hand, dragging along the floor behind him, was a large axe. Third, his face was completely hidden behind a black leather gas mask. I stood at that peephole completely frozen. The kind of frozen where your body just stops functioning for a moment because what you're looking at is so far outside the range of normal experience that your brain doesn't know what to do with it. This was not something that happened in real apartment buildings in the real world. This was something out of a horror film. And yet here he was, right on the other side of my door. And then, as if things were not already surreal enough, he started to sing. A soft, muffled, distorted voice coming through the gas mask, humming out some kind of verse. When he finished, he lifted that axe and swung it straight into my door. The impact threw me backward. I scrambled to my feet and rushed back to the peephole with my heart slamming in my chest. And then I heard another voice from somewhere further down the hallway, a different person, surprised and angry, shouting at the man, what in the world was he doing? When I looked through the peephole again, the man was gone. There was a fire escape door to the left of my apartment, and he had gone through it. A moment later, the building security guard came into view with his taser already drawn. The guard called out to me, asking if I wanted him to contact the police. I shouted through the door that I already had. He said he was heading out to cut the man off. They didn't find him. The complex backed onto a small stretch of forest, and there were simply too many directions he could have run. He was never caught, never identified. He walked out of that building and disappeared. When my lease ended, I moved out. I'd put up with a great deal in that apartment complex, the noise, the confrontations, the general atmosphere of tension. But a shirtless man in a gas mask dragging an axe down my hallway and embedding it in my front door was where my tolerance ended. I can almost laugh about it now, with enough distance between me and that night. Almost. But standing at that peephole in the dark, staring at something that had no right to exist in the ordinary world, that is not a feeling that completely goes away. Stay safe out there. And if something doesn't feel right where you live, trust that feeling. You deserve to feel safe in your own home. What do you think about what you've heard tonight? Which of these stories has stayed with you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I genuinely love hearing from you. And if something similar has ever happened to you, please share it. You'd be surprised how many people feel less alone when they hear that someone else has been through something they thought only happened to them. Story 7, The Shadow on the Tracks. I want to preface this by saying something clearly. I am not, by nature, someone who believes in things that can't be explained. I've spent most of my life firmly on the side of skepticism. I like evidence. I like things that make sense. When people talk about paranormal experiences or unexplainable phenomena, my default response has always been to look for the logical explanation first and work from there. But something happened to me not too long ago that I still cannot explain. And it shifted something in me, not completely, but enough that I can no longer say with the same confidence that I once had that these things are impossible. I'd seen a post somewhere online, a thread where people were asking each other whether they had ever seen what are sometimes called shadow people. I'd read through some of the responses out of casual curiosity, and I noted that different people described very different experiences with these things. Some encounters seemed benign, others frightening. I filed it away as an interesting piece of internet folklore and didn't think much more about it. Until what happened at the train station. I was there waiting to board a train. I'd spent the day visiting a friend who had recently moved, stopping by to see their new place and wish them well in their new chapter. I was heading home afterward, standing in the line of passengers waiting to board. It was raining, not heavily, just a light, steady rain, the kind that makes everything slightly gray and blurred at the edges but doesn't really affect your visibility in any meaningful way. I was standing there, not really thinking about anything, just letting my eyes drift toward the tracks the way you do when you're waiting. And something on the tracks caught my attention. There was a figure standing there. My first instinct was concern for another person, because that was what it looked like, at first. Something human-shaped, standing right there on the tracks. But as I kept looking at it, something felt deeply wrong about what I was seeing. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. I made sure I was actually seeing what I thought I was seeing. It was not a person. Or at least, not a living one. The figure was entirely dark, not wearing dark clothes, but dark in itself, the way a shadow is dark. It had the shape of a person, roughly, but the details were all wrong. The way it moved, or rather, the way it seemed to exist, reminded me of the static you'd see on an old television set that had lost its signal. A restless, flickering quality, like it wasn't quite solidly there. And when I looked more closely, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Part of its left leg was missing, not hidden, not obscured by shadow, but genuinely absent, just below the knee. And the shape of its head wasn't right either. Part of it appeared to have collapsed inward, like something that had been damaged beyond repair. I stood there staring, fully aware that what I was looking at made no sense. And I was also fully aware that not a single other person in that line of waiting passengers seemed to see it. People around me were on their phones, chatting with companions, doing everything people do while they wait. Not one person was looking at the tracks with alarm. A platform announcement came over the speakers letting us know the train was approaching and reminding passengers to stand clear of the tracks. And I thought, if there is any chance that this is a real person, even a slightly injured or disoriented real person, they are about to be struck by an oncoming train. I started to panic. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make anyone else see what I was seeing or take it seriously. I heard the train's brakes as it came in. It pulled into the station. It passed directly through the space where the figure was standing. And there were no screams. No sound of impact. No reaction from anyone on the platform. Nothing. The train came to a stop in front of us, and I looked back toward where the figure had been. It was still there. I cannot fully explain what I felt in that moment. Some combination of terror and unreality, the sensation that the ground beneath my feet was less solid than it had been a moment before. I was about to step onto the train. I wanted to be away from there, somewhere enclosed and moving, anywhere other than that platform. But before I could move, I felt something, not quite a touch, but a pressure, a pull of attention. And I looked back. The figure had turned toward me. It had no face I could make out. No eyes, no features. But I could feel it looking at me the way you can sometimes feel a gaze on the back of your neck without seeing the person behind you. It was focused on me, and I knew it the same way you know something in a dream, without needing it to be explained. Something tapped my shoulder, and a voice right behind me said, not unkindly, but with the firm impatience of someone who has been waiting, "Excuse me, miss, could you please move? There are people trying to board." I had been standing perfectly still, blocking the entrance, without realizing any time had passed at all. I apologized. I stepped back. I let the train go. I stood on the platform and watched the train pull away from the station. And through the window, in the train car closest to where I stood, I could see that shadow, or whatever it was, inside. Standing in the aisle, looming over a woman passenger near the door. Watching her in the way you might study something you don't fully understand yet. The train disappeared around the bend, and I stood there alone in the rain. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know if it was something real or something my mind produced for reasons I'll never understand. I don't know whether that woman on the train was in any danger, or whether she was completely fine, or whether she even knew something unusual was nearby. I think about her sometimes. I hope she was all right. And I still cannot tell you what I saw that night at the train station. But I can tell you that I've never looked at a crowded platform the same way since. And when I stand in a line of people and everyone around me seems completely absorbed in their own world, I find myself looking a little more carefully at what else might be standing among us that they haven't noticed yet. Thank you so much for spending this time with me tonight. These stories are not easy ones, they carry real weight, real fear, and in some cases, real grief. If you made it all the way through to the end, I want you to know that I genuinely appreciate you being here. This community means a great deal to me. If you have a story of your own, something that happened to you or someone close to you that you've never been able to explain, or something that still keeps you up at night, please share it in the comments below. I read everything, and your experiences matter. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell so you're the first to know when new stories arrive. And if there's someone in your life who loves a good, genuinely creepy story, share this video with them. It means the world and helps this community reach even more people. Until next time, keep your doors locked, trust your instincts, and take good care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.